The prairie wind howled through the canyon like a chorus of restless ghosts, carrying the sharp tang of cedar smoke and the faint, metallic sting of blood. Evelyn Harper's wrists burned raw against the coarse rawhide ties, each movement sending a fresh sting through her skin as she stumbled forward. Her white riding dress, once pressed and delicate like her mother's Sunday linens, was now streaked with dirt, torn at the hem, and spattered with mud. She had been ripped from her horse only hours ago, dragged from the familiar openness of her father's ranch and thrust into a world of shadows and firelight. The camp was alive with noise shouts, drums, the high-pitched laughter of children darting between the fires while dogs barked at the sudden intrusion of the captive woman. Evelyn's heart pounded as though it might crack her ribs. She had heard stories about these people all her life, how they struck without warning, how they left no survivors, how they were wild and merciless. Yet as she looked around, through her veil of fear, she saw not a band of bloodthirsty monsters, but families, women stirring stews, children carrying wood, old men seated with faces lined, like maps of rivers and mountains and then there was him, the man who had taken her from her horse. He stood apart from the others, broad shoulders catching the glow of the fire. His bare chest, painted with streaks of ochre, bore scars that crossed like jagged lightning bolts, marks not of weakness but of survival. His hair, black as raven feathers, hung loose down his back, catching sparks of firelight. His presence was commanding, though he did not boast or raise his voice. He merely watched her, those dark eyes steady, unreadable, patient. It unsettled her more than if he had shouted or laughed. Evelyn's breath caught when their gazes locked. He didn't look at her like prey. He looked at her as though he were weighing something, as though she were a puzzle whose meaning had yet to be revealed. Her knees nearly buckled, but the warrior's hand shot out firm and sure, gripping her, arm to steady her. His touch seared through her sleeve, making her heart stumble in her chest. He didn't tighten his grip, didn't bruise her flesh like she had feared. He simply held her upright, then released her once she steadied herself. The other warriors laughed among themselves, tossing words in a tongue she couldn't understand, their voices sharp and quick like arrows whistling through the air. But the man who had taken her, he said nothing. He only gestured, guiding her toward the central fire. They made her sit on a blanket spread upon the ground. Her ankles were still bound, but her hands were free now, trembling in her lap. A bowl of stew was set before her, its rich scent of corn and rabbit making her stomach twist with hunger. Evelyn had not eaten since dawn, but pride and fear sealed her lips. She turned her head away. A murmur spread through the onlookers, and the warrior stepped forward, crouching down so that his face was level with hers. His expression remained unreadable, but his voice deep, deliberate, halting in English cut through the noise of the camp. "You eat," he said simply. Evelyn swallowed hard. "I won't." Her voice quivered despite her effort to sound defiant. Something flickered in his eyes, not anger but something sharper like curiosity. He studied her a long moment before replying. "You will," he said. Not a threat, not a plea, just a certainty. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night sky. Around her, the warriors returned to their talk and laughter, but Evelyn's world had narrowed to the quiet space between her and the man crouching in front of her. The weight of his presence pressed against her more than the ropes at her ankles. She tried to look away, but his gaze held her fast. And in that moment, something terrifying and bewildering unfolded inside her. She realized she feared him less than she feared what might happen if he decided to leave her alone. Her life had always been confined days of embroidery, of being told how to sit, how to smile, how to wait for a marriage that would tie her future to some man's land or fortune. No man had ever looked at her like this warrior did, not with hunger, not with pity, but with a kind of watchfulness that made her feel both vulnerable and alive. Evelyn's lips parted before she realized she was speaking. Her voice, small and fragile, trembled into the fire-lit night. "Why haven't you killed me?" The warrior leaned back slightly, his expression still unreadable. He glanced at the flames, then back at her. "I do not kill women," he said. Words should have calmed her. Instead, they set her heart racing even faster. Because they meant something else entirely. She was not his prisoner for death. She was his for another reason, and she did not yet know if that was better. Or far worse. Evelyn learned his name not from his lips, but from the whispers of others. Taza. The sound of it rolled through the camp like something solid, respected. Children spoke it in awe, women in low tones, warriors with the weight of loyalty. He was young, but the way the people looked at him carried something more than age. It was the look given to a man who had survived trials that would have broken others. Evelyn sat near the fire, her ankles still bound. Her hands, though free, rested limply in her lap, too weary to tremble any more. The flames snapped, sending sparks up into the black night where they vanished among the stars. She felt the eyes of the camp on her, though none came too close. They gave her space as though she were not entirely real, as though she were a ghost from another world. Taza moved differently than the rest. Where others barked commands or laughed loudly, he spoke sparingly, his words measured like stones. Placed carefully in a river. She saw him across the camp, crouched over an older man whose arm bore a fresh wound. His scarred hands pressed a poultice into the gash, movement slow but deliberate, not hurried, not careless. His hair, long and black, slid forward across his chest as he bent, catching the firelight like strands of obsidian. Evelyn expected harshness from him, but what she saw instead unsettled her more. There was gentleness in his touch, even as the elder hissed in pain. She did not realize she was staring until his eyes lifted, catching hers from across the fire. Evelyn's breath stilled. There was no mocking in his gaze, no cruelty. Only that same unreadable patience, as though she were being weighed, measured, understood in ways she didn't wish to be. Her cheeks burned, and she looked away quickly, fixing her eyes on the dirt at her feet. Moments later, the shadow of his presence fell over her. She dared not raise her head, but she felt it, the way the firelight seemed dimmer when he blocked it, the warmth of his body even at a distance. Slowly, deliberately, he crouched before her. His hand moved, and she flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, the rawhide at her ankles loosened with a swift cut of his blade. The ropes fell away, leaving angry red welts across her skin. She sucked in a breath and rubbed at them, her voice small, uncertain. Why are you doing this?" Taza's head tilted slightly, as though he were surprised she'd asked. His English was halting, heavy with an accent, but his voice was deep and even. "I do not hurt women," he said. His dark eyes did not leave hers. "You are safe with me." The words should have soothed her, but instead they made her chest tighten, because being safe here did not feel like safety. At all. Not when his gaze pierced through her carefully built defenses, not when the camp around her seemed both foreign and strangely alive. Evelyn's world had been one of fences and parlors, of curtained windows and sermons whispered in stiff-backed pews. Her father's ranch had always been a place of order. Men worked, women obeyed, and girls like her were meant to be seen but never truly touched, never truly known. She had never belonged anywhere outside that cage, and yet, sitting in the firelight, the ropes gone from her ankles, the warmth of the stew's scent rising, she felt something unfamiliar creeping into her chest. A dangerous thought, one she dared not name. Taza stood again, towering above her. The bone necklaces around his neck caught the firelight, the feathers in his arm band shifting with his breath. He glanced once more at her wrists, where the marks of the rope still lingered, before turning to walk back toward the wounded elder. Had not asked for thanks. He had not sought her fear. He had simply freed her because he could, because something inside him had chosen to. Evelyn lay awake beneath the heavy blanket they had given her, the sound of drums echoing faintly against the canyon walls. Her heart would not slow, her mind restless. The warrior's voice echoed inside her head. You are safe. With me. But what did safety mean in a world where nothing was familiar? And why, in the quiet dark, did those words stir her more than the promises of any man she had ever known? She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. Only the image of Taza, the scars, the calm, the intensity of his gaze remained, and though she would not admit it, not even to herself, fear was no longer the only thing she felt. Evelyn thought captivity would feel like a cage. She expected blows, jeers, chains that cut into skin until the body bent to submission. Instead, the days that followed tested her in quieter, more exhausting ways. The Apache camp never stood still. At first light, the women bundled their woven blankets. Children gathered sticks and baskets, and warriors mounted their ponies. The camp seemed to vanish into the canyons like smoke dispersing in the wind, leaving no trace they had ever been there. Evelyn was placed on a small paint pony, tethered close to Taza's horse. He did not look at her as they rode, but she felt his nearness all the same, like a mountain looming always in the corner of her sight. The land around them was nothing like the rolling grasslands of her father's ranch. Here, the earth broke apart into jagged cliffs and dry riverbeds. The soil painted red and gold beneath a sky that stretched forever. The sun pressed down like a hammer, yet the Apache moved with ease, as though the land itself carried them forward. Evelyn, unused to long rides, felt every ache in her bones, every raw rub of leather against her legs. Still, she sat tall, refusing. To let them see her falter dot at night, the camp rebuilt itself in some hidden canyon or along the edge of a river. Fires sparked to life, smoke curling into the starlit sky. Evelyn was always given food: roasted rabbit, flatbread of mesquite flour, sometimes berries or nuts gathered along the trail. She never starved. She was never struck. And yet, she felt more like an outsider than she had ever felt in her life. Her father's world had been rigid, narrow, predictable. Here, she found herself drifting in a current she could not fight, and she hated the part of her that began to surrender to its pull. One evening, after a grueling day's ride, Evelyn sat, shivering by the fire. The desert night had teeth, biting through her thin dress with icy sharpness. She pulled her knees to her chest, wishing desperately for the quilts of her old room. A shadow fell across her. She looked up. Taza stood there, a wool blanket in his hands. Its weave was thick and patterned in colors of earth and sky. For a moment, he simply held it out. Evelyn stared. Suspicion prickled her skin. Why? She whispered, her voice hoarse from dust and silence. His gaze lingered on her, unreadable. As always. When he finally spoke, his words were simple. Because you are cold. He draped the blanket across her shoulders without waiting for permission. The heat of it enveloped her instantly, carrying with it a faint smell of smoke and sage. Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, but the words lodged in her chest. To thank him would feel like surrender. Taza stepped back, crouching at his own fire across from hers. He spoke to no one else, ate sparingly, and polished the stone tip of an arrowhead with steady, deliberate strokes. Yet Evelyn felt the weight of his presence more than the laughter of the warriors or the crackle of the flames. The blanket warmed her body, but unease gnawed at her heart. All her life she had been guarded, untouched. Suitors had eyed her like cattle to be traded, her father's watchful glare always cutting short any attempt at closeness. She had never felt a man's hand linger, never allowed anyone near enough to leave a mark. She had thought herself strong in that way, unyielding. But this man, this stranger, with a single blanket, with a glance that seemed to see past her defenses, unsettled everything. Later that night, as the camp quieted and the stars spread thick across the sky, Evelyn lay awake beneath the wool. Her mind turned restlessly. She thought of her father's voice, stern and commanding. She thought of her mother's cold hands arranging her hair just so, of the sermons that warned of heathens and savages. And yet, what had any of those voices ever given her? Did they ever care if she was warm, if she was seen? Her heart thudded painfully as she rolled onto her side. Across the fire, Taza sat with his back to her, the glow of the flames painting his strong shoulders in gold. He was still awake, sharpening his blade as though he could carve away the weight of the world itself. For reasons she could not explain, Evelyn closed her eyes only when she was sure he was still there. She did not yet trust him, but she trusted his presence, and that, she realized with a shiver, frightened her more than all the stories she had ever been told. The first time Evelyn felt the earth soften beneath her feet again, it was at the river. The camp had chosen to rest there for the night, where the current cut through the canyon in a winding silver ribbon. The water moved swiftly, its surface catching the fading light of the setting sun like shards of broken glass. For days dust had clung to Evelyn's skin, grit ground into her nails, her hair tangled into knots. The river was a temptation she could not resist. She crouched at the bank, the hem of her torn dress dragging in the mud. The water was shockingly cold when she dipped her fingers in, sending a shiver through her bones. She leaned farther, splashing, her face scrubbing at her cheeks until the grime lifted and the skin beneath burned raw. It was the first moment she had felt something close to human again since the day she was taken. But the bank was slick, softened by the current, and as she shifted her weight, her boots slipped out. The river seized her in an instant. Cold rushed over her head, her lungs clenching as water forced into her mouth. She thrashed, panic clawing her chest. The current was stronger than she imagined, pulling her skirts down like anchors, dragging her farther from the bank. She gasped for air, the canyon spinning, the sky a blur above her. Then Dash arms, strong, unyielding, wrapping around her waist, was wrenched upward, coughing, spitting river water as her head broke the surface. A deep voice barked something against her ear, but the roar of the current drowned it out. She clung instinctively, her hands fisting against warm skin and bone. As the man dragged her toward the shore, her knees hit gravel, then mud, until finally she collapsed onto the bank, heaving for breath. When her vision cleared, he was there. Taza. Water streamed down his chest, dripping from the strands of his long black hair. His muscles flexed as he braced himself on his hands, his breathing heavy but controlled. Ochre paint washed from his skin, leaving streaks of color that clung stubbornly to his scars. The tribal jewelry around his neck and arms gleamed with droplets of water, catching the last light of dusk. Evelyn realized with a start how close their bodies were, his shadow falling entirely over her as though shielding her even now from this river's reach. Her lips trembled before the words spilled out, unbidden, unplanned. "I've never been touched by anyone." The confession came out in a whisper, so fragile she barely recognized it as her own voice. She hadn't meant to speak it. It was a truth she had never said aloud, not even to herself. All her life, she had been untouchable. Her father's stern gaze kept suitors at a distance. Her mother's rules caged her in silken walls, and Evelyn herself had wrapped her body in layers of silence and obedience. No hand had ever lingered. No closeness had ever been allowed. Until now. Until this moment, when his arms had been the only thing keeping her from death. Taza's gaze did not waver. his eyes dark and steady, fixed on hers as though he could see the weight of the secret she had just bared. He leaned closer, not with haste, but with deliberate calm, his breath still heavy from the river. When he spoke, his voice was low, rumbling, like distant thunder. "Then we start slow." The words struck her like a flame pressed to paper. They burned and spread, setting her chest alight with something she had no name for: fear, longing, a dangerous pull toward something she had been taught was forbidden, yet felt like the only truth she had ever known. The canyon seemed to hush. The river, relentless as it was, sounded far away now. Her pulse beat in her ears, louder than the current, louder than the crackle of the fires being lit behind them. Taza rose, offering her his hand. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, staring at it, the hand that had dragged her from death, the hand that carried both scars and gentleness. Then, slowly, she placed hers into it. He pulled her to her feet. Evelyn stood there, dripping, shivering, yet alive in a way she had never felt before. The girl who had once belonged only to fences and parlors had been touched by something wild, something untamed, and she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, there would be no going back. Gunfire shattered the calm of the canyon like a thunderclap. The woman's scream echoed off the stone walls, and the Apache warrior's hand was already on his weapon before the sound fully died. The river still roared behind them, but now another noise cut through the night, the thunder of hooves, the sharp bark of rifles, the guttural shouts of men. White soldiers, their blue coats dulled by dust and moonlight, surged from the trees like wolves. Rifles raised, faces grim. The girl froze, her heart slamming in her chest. For one trembling second she thought rescue had come, but the warrior moved faster than thought, his body a shield, his chest bare but solid as stone. "Stay low," he ordered, his voice deep, commanding, a growl beneath the roar of chaos. He reached for her wrist, tugging her behind the rocks. His long black hair, still wet from the river, clung to his back and shoulders, gleaming like obsidian. Tribal jewelry rattled softly against his scarred chest as he crouched. The soldier's bullets sparked against stone, ricocheting with deadly whines. One struck near her foot, throwing dirt into her dress. She gasped, clutching the ground. The warrior didn't flinch. He leaned out from cover, released a sharp whistle, and within seconds, shadows stirred in the camp behind them. Apache warriors emerged like ghosts from the night, their faces painted, their bows taut, rifles lifted. A storm was about to break. The girl dared to look up at him. His eyes caught hers, steady, unwavering, unreadable. "You want freedom?" he asked, his voice low, almost lost to the chaos. "Stay alive beside me." Her throat tightened. She didn't answer, couldn't. The soldiers advanced. Bayonets glinted. Horses snorted. Orders rang out. One man shouted, "Take the girl. Kill the rest." Her blood ran cold. The Apache warrior snarled, a sound both feral and human, and sprang from the rocks. He moved like lightning, his body powerful and unyielding, a blend of raw strength and practiced grace. His bare chest shone under the moon, tribal jewelry flashing as he struck. He grabbed a soldier's rifle, wrenched it free, and swung it like a staff, knocking the man into the dirt. Another raised a pistol too slow. The warrior drove his knife into the man's arm and kicked him back into the river. The girl crawled backward, trembling, her torn dress catching on the rocks. She should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to flee into the dark, to escape both the warrior and the soldiers. But her legs refused to obey. Instead, she found herself watching him, watching the way his body twisted with each strike, the way his muscles flexed under firelight, the way his long black hair snapped behind him like a whip. He was terrifying. Yes, but there was something else there too. Something magnetic, something she couldn't name. Gunfire lit the canyon in bursts of flame. The Apache warriors answered with arrows and rifles, their war cries rising into the night. Smoke drifted, thick and acrid, stinging her eyes. Then a soldier broke through the chaos, charging toward her with a bayonet gleaming. She shrieked, scrambling. Back, her hands bleeding from sharp stone. Before steel could touch her, the Apache warrior was there. He slammed into the man with brutal force, his knife flashing once in the firelight. The soldier fell. Dead. The warrior turned, chest heaving. His face inches from hers. His dark eyes burned not with cruelty, but with something fiercer, deeper, unrelenting. "I told you," he said, his voice low and steady even as the battle raged around them. "You stay alive with me, or you don't stay alive at all." And then he pulled her to her feet, his grip unyielding as gunfire cracked and death circled closer. The canyon walls funneled a sound of war until it felt like the earth itself was splitting apart. Gunfire cracked, arrows hissed, and the air was heavy with smoke and the metallic tang of blood. The Apache warrior's hand never left hers as he dragged her through the chaos. His grip was iron, his body a shield, his long black hair whipping behind him as they ran. She stumbled, her torn dress snagging on brush and rock, but he pulled her forward without pause. "Move!" he growled, his voice raw, his chest heaving. His tribal jewelry rattled with each step, glinting in the erratic light of fire and muzzle flashes. Behind them, the soldiers pressed harder. She could hear them shouting, their boots pounding against stone, their rifles cracking. One bullet sparked off the rocks inches from her head. She cried out, falling, but he yanked her up again as though she weighed nothing. The canyon narrowed, leading them toward a jagged path that twisted upward along the cliffside. The warrior shoved her ahead of him, his dark eyes sweeping the shadows. "For movement." "Climb," he ordered. Her palms scraped raw against the stone, her lungs burning with each breath, but she obeyed. Above, the night sky seemed impossibly far, streaked with drifting smoke and pale stars. Her heartbeat roared louder than the battle. Halfway up, a rifle cracked. She flinched. The warrior grunted a sharp sound that made her blood turn cold. She twisted, her eyes wide. A dark streak cut across his shoulder, blood gleaming in the firelight. Yet he didn't falter. His muscles flexed, his powerful body moving with relentless precision. He grabbed the ledge beside her and hoisted them both higher. "You're hit," she gasped. He ignored her. "Keep climbing." Something inside her shifted then. Until now, she had thought only of her own fear, her own survival. But watching him bleed and still drive forward lit a strange fire in her chest. He was protecting her, not because he had to, not because she asked, but because he chose to. They reached the top of the ledge, breathless, the battle dimming below. The river gleamed silver in the distance, but the shouts of soldiers carried. Up the canyon, closer, hungrier, the warrior dropped to one knee, his hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. For the first time since she'd met him, he seemed human, vulnerable. His long black hair clung to his chest, damp with sweat and blood, his scarred skin shining in the moonlight. She hesitated only a moment before tearing a strip from her dress. Kneeling beside him, her hands trembling, she pressed the cloth to his wound. He stiffened, his dark eyes locking on hers. "Why?" he asked, his voice low, uncertain. Her throat tightened. She didn't know how to explain it, not when she had been his captive, not when she still feared him. But the truth broke from her lips anyway. "Because you saved me." For a heartbeat, silence hung between them. His gaze softened, just barely, the fire inside him dimming to something slower, warmer. Then he leaned closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the steady power of his breath. "You don't understand," he murmured, his lips near her ear. You're alive because I will it. You breathe because I allow it." Her chest rose and fell, her body trembling at the sound of his words. And yet, instead of terror, something else bloomed inside her, something dangerous. Before she could answer, a shout echoed from below. Soldiers were scaling the rocks, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies. The moment fractured. The warrior surged to his feet, pulling her with him. His bloodied shoulder glistened, but his body moved with untamed strength, his tribal jewelry swaying. With every stride, he looked down at her, eyes dark as obsidian. "Stay close," he commanded. "If you fall behind, I won't come back for you." And with that, he turned toward the wilderness, toward deeper shadows, deeper danger, and she followed, her heart pounding with fear, confusion, and something she dared not yet name. The night stretched on like a fever dream, every breath filled with smoke and the sharp scent of blood. The canyon behind them pulsed with gunfire, but ahead lay only wilderness, endless black pines, sharp ridges, and shadows that seemed alive. The Apache warrior moved swiftly despite the wound in his shoulder. His grip on her wrist was iron, guiding her over stones and through narrow paths, his body tense but unyielding. His long black hair clung to his skin, his chest glistening with sweat, scars etched deep into his flesh like stories carved by time. His tribal jewelry, bones, feathers, leather bands caught glimmers of moonlight, rattling softly as though whispering secrets to the night. She stumbled, breath ragged, her torn dress dragging in the dirt. Every muscle screamed for rest. "I can't," she gasped, her voice breaking. He stopped abruptly, turning to her. His dark eyes pinned her in place, sharp and steady even in the chaos. "You can," he said. His voice was deep, raw, and edged. With something more than command, "You will, or you die here." Her heart pounded, not only from fear but from the force of his presence. She should hate him. She should run. But her legs refused to move away from him. They pressed on until the sounds of battle faded into echoes, swallowed by the forest. Finally, he slowed, leading her into a small hollow sheltered by jagged stone and thick pines. The world outside was still alive with danger, but here for a moment the night held its breath. He released her wrist. For the first time she stood. Apart from him, free. Her ankles ached, her throat raw, yet freedom felt heavier than she imagined. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at him as he sank against the rock, his broad chest rising and falling with each strained breath. Blood streaked down his arm, glistening dark. Without thinking, she knelt beside him. Her trembling hands reached for the torn cloth binding his shoulder, adjusting it, pressing harder to slow the bleeding. His eyes followed her every movement. There was no softness in them, but there was no cruelty either, only a fierce burning intensity. "You're not afraid anymore," he murmured out her breath caught. She wasn't sure if it was true, but the words slipped from her lips before she could stop them. "Maybe not of you." The corner of his mouth twitched, the ghost of something that might have been a smile. He leaned closer, his heat enveloping her, his breath brushing against her cheek. "Do you know what you're saying?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. Her pulse thundered. The world had narrowed to just him, the fire in his eyes, the rough strength of his body, the way every scar on his skin seemed to speak of battles fought and survived. She shook her head faintly, her hair falling loose around her face. "I don't know," she whispered. "I just know I shouldn't feel this way." His hand lifted slowly, deliberately, until his fingers brushed against her jaw. Calloused, warm, commanding. She shivered beneath his touch. "You said you've never been touched," he said, repeating the words she had spoken by the fire on the first night. His dark gaze locked on hers. "Then let's start slow." Her breath trembled, her lips parting. Not in protest, but in something dangerously close to surrender. The night around them seemed to vanish, the soldiers, the danger, the smoke leaving only the silence of the forest and the beating of her heart. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers with the barest whisper of contact, a promise rather than a claim. For one endless moment, she let herself fall into him. Then a crack split the night. A rifle. Too close. She flinched. He pulled back instantly, his body tense, scanning the shadows. The spell was broken, replaced by the cold reminder of pursuit. He rose, wincing from his wound, and extended his hand to her. "This isn't finished," he said, his voice steady, iron beneath the softness that had flickered only moments before. "Not until you decide who you belong to." Her chest tightened, her breath shallow. She placed her hand in his. The choice. Unspoken but made nonetheless. Together they vanished into the dark forest, hunted by soldiers, bound by something neither of them could yet name, but neither could deny.